Hello, everyone. Coach Nelson here. Just wanted to go ahead and video our lesson like we talked about the other day. So we're going to go ahead and hop on and do so. We're going to go ahead and look at, hold on one second. Okay. Okay, should be good to go. Had some technical difficulties there for a second. So hope you guys are staying safe and warm. Hopefully we get to get you back into class soon. But we're just going to go ahead today and we're going to talk about our first section in Chapter 8, which is kind of the beginnings of the Civil War time in the Indian Territory. Okay, like we mentioned in class before, maybe a lot of people don't really think that the Civil War actually kind of played a key part in Oklahoma history, but it actually did. Okay, there was a few major battles in and around the Tulsa area. One happened near Honey Springs, which is near Shakota, which is around I-40 in southeastern Oklahoma. And one actually happened around Tulsa. We'll get into that. It's involving the Creek Indians. So we'll go ahead and kind of talk about the precursors of the war, kind of the causes of the war today, and then you guys should be able to finish this. And then tomorrow in class will be office hours, so I'll post a short assignment. And then Thursday, either we're in school or virtual, we'll just go ahead and knock out Chapter 8, Section 2, which kind of gets into the main parts of the war and kind of the outcome we'll discuss. So that's where we're kind of headed in class. And, you know, we've talked about kind of the removal of the 5 civilized tribes and how they eventually arrived in Oklahoma in the 30s and 40s of the 1800s. So we're kind of getting into the 1850s and 1860s. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start real fast. Okay, so here's a good little map of kind of where some battles took place near around the Tulsa and also the greater state area as well. Okay, Honey Springs and Middle Boggy Depot, those are the two we're probably going to focus on the most. The other ones in the northern parts of the state were kind of more minor battles in a sense. But the Honey Springs one was by far the biggest one we're going to talk about. It involved literally every single one of the 5 civilized tribes. They had different factions and different bands fighting in that. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. Okay, so divided loyalties. Let's talk about that one real fast. Oh, whoops. Okay, so many differences between southern and northern states began to lead to discourse. Okay, so discourse in a sense means disagreement. Okay, so we've got to take ourselves back into these times in American history. Okay, the South kind of just went on their own with most things. Okay, they didn't want Northern help, and if they did, they didn't really accept it every now and again. And also, the North was very different than the South. Okay, you guys know the North did not allow slavery. Okay, it was above what was called the Mason-Dixon line, which was kind of on the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. So anywhere north of that could not be a slave state. And also, we're going to talk about the Missouri Compromise here in a second. And that kind of sets the new boundaries of potential states becoming slave states. So there's this kind of rivalry brewing in the South and also in the upper parts of the North. Okay, so differing views on slavery. That is the main issue why the Civil War actually proceeds. Okay, it was this big disagreement on slavery. Okay, the South depended on slavery, okay, for their economy. Okay, so the economy in the North was kind of built on this Industrial Revolution type era where big factories kind of ruled the day. And the South was kind of far behind on that. They were kind of more back into the colonial era, okay, where they had big plantations and big farms and crops and all that stuff. Okay, so states' rights also. The South really didn't feel like they were represented well in Washington, and they felt like they didn't get a fair shake and they didn't have enough power. So the Southern states eventually secede from the Union and form their own country, the Confederate States of America, which we'll get into here in a little bit. Okay, so like I mentioned on the Missouri Compromise, okay, hopefully you guys can see my mouse. I'm not 100% sure. I think you can. The Missouri Compromise comes into play because it's actually the northern border of Oklahoma and Kansas. Okay, so anywhere north of that Missouri Compromise line, states cannot be slave states if they were new states. Okay, but anywhere south of that, so including the Arkansas Territory, which was eventually Oklahoma, if that became a state, it could definitely have slaves. Okay, so if you can see that again, it's the 3630 parallel right here. So anywhere north of that with a new state could not have slaves, but anywhere south actually could. Okay, so this kind of caused a big disagreement because the South felt like any new state could have their own decision. Okay, and so this eventually kind of leads us into war as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Okay, causes. The main cause, like I mentioned a second ago, was definitely slavery. Okay, slavery was the issue of the day. Okay, slavery was outlawed in the North, and it was very prevalent in the South. Okay, African Americans' rights in the South were not the same as in the northern parts of the United States. Okay, so this was the main reason the Civil War happened. Okay, if you read this, this is a political newspaper ad. We talked about this guy. He served in Oklahoma before eventually becoming the president of the Confederate States. His name is Jefferson Davis. Okay, it says "Unite or Die," and if you see, it's a snake kind of chopped up into all different pieces, and it has these 2 letters or 3 letters on every single part of the snake, including like South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, North Carolina, Texas, Maryland, Virginia, Florida, Arkansas, all these different southern states. Okay, it says slave states. Once more, let me repeat that the only way of preserving our slave property, or what we prize more than life, our liberty, is a union with each other. Okay, so the South really banded with one another around this idea of keeping slavery and their way of life going. Okay, so that's what was at stake here in the Civil War. Okay, so the South, like I mentioned, eventually secedes, and we see what had happened at Fort Sumner. You guys had an article or a puzzle about that the other day. That's where the first shots of the Civil War were fought. Okay, which is in South Carolina, which is considered a southern state. Okay, some other causes, like I mentioned, include the economy. The South stayed in a pre-industrial revolution economy focusing on agriculture. Okay, so that agriculture was focused around plantations and cotton and tobacco, which in their minds needed slave labor to go ahead and get that done. Okay, so slaves were not paid, and if they were, it was a very low salary. Okay, so the southern states, especially the well-to-do Southerners, who eventually they didn't even fight in the war. Okay, it was mostly the poor, the middle-class people of the South. They eventually realized that their way of life is coming to an end, and they don't want that to happen. So that's why eventually the Civil War gets fought. Okay, the North prospered due to the Industrial Revolution. A lot of big factories, textile plants, all that stuff that's going on in the northern parts of the U.S. are not happening in the South, causing a depression-like state, lots of poverty, lots of unemployment is going on also in the South. Okay, also states' rights. The South wanted rights to disobey federal compromises and also to back out of deals they did not feel favored the South. So the southern states banded together to join the Confederacy, and they felt like I mentioned earlier, that their rights and their point of view were not being heard in Washington. So there's 3 things that caused the Civil War. 1 is slavery. Okay, 2 is states' rights. Okay, and then 3 is the economic differences. But by far, definitely the main reason was slavery. Okay, so continued. This is a picture of Abraham Lincoln. Okay, Abraham Lincoln gets elected in the election of 1860. Okay, as soon as this happens, okay, the Southerners don't even, in some states, have Abraham Lincoln on the ballot. Okay, so he takes the presidency in 1860. Okay, and the South knows if he gains the office in Washington, that there is either going to be a war or they're going to have to secede from the Union, because Abraham Lincoln is coming for those slave states. Okay, so violence between pro-slavery and abolitionists. Abolitionist is a term meaning people for the end of slavery began to occur. Battles erupted in a thing called Bleeding Kansas. Okay, so Kansas was kind of a disputed state between slave and non-slave, so even battles occurred there. Okay, the Dred Scott case, which was a Supreme Court case of a freedman, which was a freed slave that escaped north all the way up into Canada. And at this time in American history, if you were a freed slave or a slave that escaped, you could eventually get tracked down by your captors. Okay, so the Dred Scott case of 1857, which ruled in favor of courts staying out of slavery, pushed tensions even higher. So even though Dred Scott was a freedman, he had to eventually go back to his plantation. Okay, this all came to a head while the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was going on. Lincoln had no support in the South, and this eventually caused southern states to secede. Okay, they didn't even view him as their president. Okay, so this was kind of the rallying cry of kind of what leads us into the Civil War. So here's a good map move my face a little bit. So the states outlined in blue are union or free states. Okay, then you have your border states, which include West Virginia, Kentucky, Missouri, West Virginia, Delaware, and also Maryland. Okay, Delaware is actually considered kind of a southern state. Okay, and also in the gray you have your slave states. Now this is a pretty neat map because if you guys have ever seen like any movies depicting the Civil War, the North, which is called the Union Army, wears blue jackets. Okay, so that's their uniform color, and then the Confederates have gray uniforms. So that's why this map is kind of, if you see it in gray, your state fought in the Confederacy, and blue was the Union. Okay, and so all this territory, including Indian territory, was kind of up for dispute. And we're eventually, in our next lesson, going to get into how Indian territory actually became a part of the Confederacy. Okay, so make sure, go ahead and finish this assignment, hit submit. If you have questions watching this, I'll have a Google Doc open for your hour of class tomorrow. So second, third, and fourth, be looking for that. I'll share that with you via an announcement. And also go ahead and knock out that bell work that I posted for today. All right, sounds good.